Hello, welcome everybody. Special mention to Lucy and Callum, who are waiting for the SEO accessibility session. It's this one. AbilityNet's done some work around SEO and accessibility connections for some time. We first did a webinar about this topic way back in 2014 with Robin, who you're going to see on the session in a moment. Working with Google as headline sponsors of the event, we were fortunate enough to be able to connect into their SEO team. So we've got a recording here of an fantastic conversation with Google directly about the influence of good practice on SEO and in reverse, the double benefit back into accessibility. So this is a pre-record, so roll VT, you're going to love this.
Well, we are really pleased to be here. SEO is obviously really high on the priority list of most web teams, marketing teams. It's obviously really important that your information, your work is visible on the internet. And we actually have the horse from whose mouth we will hear about the importance of search engine optimization. So from the horse's mouth, we have Google with us, three fantastic experts from Google itself, the home of search engine rankings, and it's still, I'm sure, by far the most popular search engine, certainly in the English-speaking world. We have three guests. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves very, very briefly, if that's all right. So, Chris, should we start with you?
Yeah, hi, my name is Christopher Patnoe, and I'm sorry you're seeing me yet again. I lead accessibility and disability inclusion for Google for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa.
John?
Cool. Hi, I'm John Mueller. I'm a search advocate on the Google Search Relations team in Zurich. And my team works to connect people who make websites and search engine engineers, essentially, to make sure that we're speaking the right language and giving useful recommendations to both sides.
Brilliant. Lizzie?
Hi, I'm Lizzie. I'm also on John's team, on the search relations team at Google. I'm a technical writer, and so my primary focus is to document what the Google guidelines are for making an SEO-friendly website. And then it's also to speak with people in the community to bring back feedback about how everyone is experiencing those guidelines.
Fantastic. And you and John wrote a brilliant article recently about SEO and accessibility. So we've absolutely got the right people on the call here today. So who would like to kick off with their take on the overlap? Is it pointing in the right direction? Are there any issues with SEO when it comes to accessibility, where maybe it isn't, there is some friction there? So who would like to get the ball rolling?
Let me start from an accessibility perspective, because in all honesty, this is not something that I had really thought about much until recently. The podcast between John and Lizzie has triggered some really exciting thoughts with me and the work that I do. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized it's actually the same mission. It's really about communicating with people, connecting people with the websites that they care about, connecting people with the contents that they care about. And if we as Google, with our mission of to make the world's information universally accessible and useful, to meet that goal, we need to do everything we can to make all of the world's information accessible and useful. That also requires having people help a little bit, and providing alt text as SEO is one of these twofers. Alt text for people who are blind, they get a chance to see what's actually being displayed when it's important. And the SEO, it can use the same information as long as it's just done thoughtfully and well. I have no idea how to do that, so I'll leave it to John and Lizzie.
Yeah, I do think there's a lot of overlap there as well. On the one hand, that's partially because I think from the SEO side of things, you want to make websites that work well for everyone. So you want to make sure that when people come to your website through the search engines, that they stay, that they recommend your website to other people. Because that's one of the things that Google looks for when it comes to ranking in the search results. Links, essentially. And links are essentially kind of in its basic form recommendations. So if you have users that go to your website and they can't deal with your content, then they're not going to recommend your website to other people. So from that level, even around accessibility is super important. I think the other angle that is almost a little bit awkward is that on the SEO side of things, SEOs do like to talk about accessibility as well, because they think it kind of helps. But they also talk about it because it's something that essentially helps search engine crawlers. So you can think about Googlebot. Our crawler is essentially a user going to your website, and it's a user who's not, I don't know, very smart. They look at the text on the page. They try to understand what you have written there. They understand the headings. They understand the anchor text that you have for links, the alt attributes for images, and things like that. But essentially, you have to help Googlebot to understand your content. And basically, by doing the normal things for accessibility, at least how I understand them, I'm not an expert, you're doing something that works well for search engine crawlers as well as for users who need some extra help with accessibility. So from that point of view, it's like on the SEO side, we like to say, well, we're doing this for accessibility, but also with kind of the thought in our head, well, actually, it helps search engines too. So it's like bonus almost.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I see it as sort of a Venn diagram, and most things fall into the middle section of the Venn diagram from SEO perspective and from accessibility. For example, alt text, like you mentioned, that would be something that both sides would want.
John, Lizzie, question for you from accessibility perspective. Is it possible to confuse the crawler? Like if a page is poorly designed, for example, we can really confuse the screen reader if everything is a bunch of divs and you're having to go all over the place. But do we also confuse the search engine in similar ways?
I think that can definitely happen. And the divs all over the place, or if you use kind of CSS tricks to move blocks of text around on a page, that's something where when Google looks at the page and tries to understand the content there, which we do by reading sentences, essentially. If we can't read clear sentences from the way that the page is structured, then we're going to have a really hard time. So from that point of view, that's something if you create a website with a clean structure, it just makes things a lot easier for Google. And that also goes to things like links. Like if you have a button that is styled to look like a link, or if you just have an image that essentially acts like a link, that's something where Google won't necessarily recognize, well, there's actually a link here that you could follow if you click on this thing. And I imagine from an accessibility point of view, that's a similar problem. If you can't recognize something as a link, but rather it uses some fancy JavaScript behind the scenes, how do you guide users to explaining that this is actually something, I don't know, that they could follow and use on your website?
I'm nodding away for any visually impaired listeners today or watchers, attendees. So absolutely. And your article, guys, was mainly had its main focus on alternative text, didn't it? Do you want to give people a kind of a quick rundown onto the best way to use alternative text on images to optimize your SEO?
I'm like looking at John, seeing if John is going to start, if I should start. I think it's funny that you say article, because it was actually a podcast recording, but I think we also published a PDF version, a text-based document of what we discussed. And then I think it was shared as an article, just for those who know about the context, how we came about joining this event. Even John and I were talking about image SEO in general, and then accessibility kind of came up as a hot topic, I guess. Alt text, from an SEO perspective, it would be using that alt equals attribute on an image. But there's more to just adding that alt attribute or alt tag. It's the words that go into that attribute to describe the image, and which images that you need to add that to. And that's something that John and I aren't so sure about. So maybe Christopher, you have some perspective on which images are important to add that kind of alt attribute too. For example, I wasn't sure about adding to what might be perceived as like a decorative image. So something that's there to add, I don't know, like, yeah. So
Yes.
should you add alt attribute to all these kinds of things, and what matters for SEO versus for accessibility?
At a high level, you want to mark up the things that matter. So if it's truly decorative, don't include it. You don't need to go through the effort, because if it doesn't impact the message that you're trying to give, it just makes it pretty, don't worry about it. But when it comes to the images that are relevant, the images that are important, you want to have a thoughtful description of these things. And the last thing in the world we want to have is sort of a keyword style, beach, ball, kids, game. The world is smarter than that. What we want to have is sort of, if you're going to do it from a database, apply an NLP on top of it to create a thoughtful sentence. Because beach, ball, games, kid is one thing, but 4 children playing football or soccer at the beach means something completely different. And one provides actually context, not just nouns. So be thoughtful when it comes to doing this. And you have all of those same words there. And Google and other engines are smart enough to understand the nouns and make this connection.
I think that's fantastic, because that overlaps so much with what we say as well. You shouldn't just randomly put keywords into the descriptions for the images. It should be something relevant, be something that gives context also to the image, so that it's something useful, I guess, for search engines and for users.
I wanted to talk then about where there might be some conflicts between SEO and accessibility, and this might be to do with organizations' brand. Maybe they have certain requirements that they have to meet that will impact accessibility. We know about color contrast, for example, that sort of thing. But is there an area where brand is in conflict with search engine optimization as well? And I'd be interested to know if you guys have any thoughts around, where SEO and accessibility might not be pushing in the same direction.
I think it's tricky, because there's so many aspects included in branding overall. So it's kind of hard to say where might that not align. But especially your mention of the color contrast, for example, that's something where, from an SEO point of view, we don't really focus on that much when it comes to search. At least on Google's side, we basically try to understand the text on the page. And if you have yellow on white background text, then as someone looking at the page, you might have trouble recognizing that text. But for search engines, they would look at that and say, well, there's text here. We can just index that text normally. So that feels like kind of one of those areas where you're touching upon where, well, from an accessibility point of view, it's really important that you can actually make your text readable. And from a search engine point of view, if we can find the text on the page, we're kind of happy. I think the ordering within the HTML, that's something that definitely plays a role. The headings are very important. I love to hear that you use headings, because SEOs always ask us about headings. And it's one of those topics where we sometimes defer back. Well, for accessibility reasons, you should do this anyway. But it's fantastic to have someone who's actually saying, well, actually, I do use those all the time, and they're really important.
Yes, and how disruptive it might be if you skip from an H2 to an H4 or something, because I see people either doing that or asking about that. Like, does this impact anything if they pick it for a style choice, for example? So say their content management system that they're using, the H4 is styled more nicely, I guess, just how they might like it visually, but then it's not matching up with the order, and that could impact other users in other ways. So it's good to hear that, like, that would lay out the page for you when you're navigating.
So, what tools would you recommend, and what kind of workflows that people could use when they're thinking about SEO and maybe accessibility as well?
one. So I work on the Google Search Central documentation site, and I've been doing some improvements for SEO and for accessibility. And one of the tools that I found helpful in determining what to fix or kind of where the problem pages were is the tool Screaming Frog, which is an external SEO tool that anyone can use. And I found it helpful in pulling the list of pages that were missing an alt attribute. So you can sort of query like all the pages that are on your site that are maybe missing something or has an alt attribute that's too short. So you can specify and link text as well. So you can say, anything shorter than 10 characters or something. Like, I'm suspicious that that's actually descriptive. It might be depending on your parameters. Yeah, like it could be specific strings as well. So for example, for link text, I think it automatically checks for things like click here as the text for a link, and it would find those pages that have links that are suspicious, that might be too short or that could be improved, and then you can add on your own strings that you think might be specific for your website that could be improved.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about Screaming Frog, I mean, on the one hand, it's not a tool from Google, so I feel awkward promoting it too much. But
I know.
I found it really useful. But basically, what it does is it crawls your whole website and looks for these kinds of issues. So on a per-page basis, obviously using something like Lighthouse is fantastic. You get so much information in there, so much information about the SEO side of things, the speed, accessibility as well. But if you have a website with, I don't know, 1,000 pages, doing that manually across is really hard. And that's where kind of these crawlers that look at all pages of your website really shine, because you can just let it run over everything. You fix the issues. You fix maybe things in your templates that are wrong. And then you double check it again and make sure that it's actually doing better. And I think, like Lizzie mentioned, a lot of these things are more about suspicious elements, where a tool can't say, it's like, oh, this link has that because it's only 9 characters long. Maybe that's OK. But knowing where suspicious things are, you kind of can drill down a little bit better.
If I can, going into Chrome Lighthouse itself gives you recommendations and warnings. It doesn't definitively say your contrast is bad, because these kinds of tools, there could be a sampling error in which samples the wrong part of an image and it detects the softest part of a smooth image, for example. So that contrast might not be good, but the rest of the image is fine. So even in Lighthouse, you don't want to definitively say this is a problem, this is a warning, this is something you should check. So even when just doing accessibility, separate from SEO, just doing accessibility, you want to go in and manually verify these things too.
But what about key trends, future developments? Where do you see this area going? Is there any kind of tips or insights that you can give us in what Google might be doing in the future when it comes to SEO and maybe accessibility as well?
Where I think there is still room for growth, and whether or not that will actually happen, like, who knows? But it feels like there's still some opportunities. For example, we have the page experience ranking factor, which is based on the Core Web Vitals, which is a set of metrics that we use to try to understand if a page is fast, if a page is reasonable when it's loading, how interactive it is, if it shifts around while you try to engage with the page. And that's something where at the moment, it uses 3 factors there. It also uses security and mobile friendliness, and I think some other factor that I just forgot. But it feels like this is one of those factors where we try to understand the user experience of a page, and that kind of maps to accessibility as well. And I could imagine at some point in the future, maybe we have some factors there that are more focused around accessibility. And I can't promise this. So this is more like my vague that maybe something like this could happen. It's also something where the folks working on Chrome are very engaged with the Core Web Vitals. It There's an open source community that's active all around speed and accessibility and all of kind of factors that could be used for this kind of metric. So that's something where if someone is really engaged on the accessibility side of things and wants to be active in the open source world, that might be a great place to start as well and kind of push things along and say, well, here is this really clean, objective measurement about accessibility. And it would be really helpful if Google were to promote it as well. And then some kind of collaboration could happen there. But
I think what can be tricky is maybe the alt text aspect, because something that you could check is just, is it there or not? Like a binary, like, do they have it or not? But measuring if it's good alt text is sort of up for discussion. It's hard to have that kind of baked into the tool, or to have that as like clear actionable guidance like you can for core web vitals, for example. Like we had, it's a number, like you can measure it and then measure improvement. But for good descriptive alt text, I don't know.
Especially if you take a look at internationalization. Doing it in one language is one thing. Doing it in all languages makes it even that much harder. Again, binary is easy. A use is harder, and then it gets even harder internationally. I get asked this question a lot. Why can't Google just see if a page is accessible and only promote those pages that are accessible? Because it's really hard to determine if it is. But even color contrast, because the sampling thing I talked about a moment ago, that's really hard to know as well. So we would want to, if we were to do this, we would want to be really, really sure that we're right. And make it possible for people to measure for themselves, or else it wouldn't be fair for anyone.
Now, I'm struggling every day with inaccessibility, but I really wouldn't like to have pages that had the key content that I needed demoted to page 4 or 5 of the search engine rankings because they aren't fully accessible. So there's definitely a balancing act there as well. Mm-hmm. So whilst I'm, calling for a certain amount of accessibility to be factored in to encourage best practice, at the same time, 98% of homepages tested, they tested 2 million homepages, and 98% didn't even meet the base level of accessibility, the single A, when we know that double A, the middle level, is the sort of legal requirement in most locations, in most regions. So this kind of brings me up to AI, because Lizzie was talking about how it's really difficult, and Chris as well, about alternative text. It's binary, is it there or not? And then after that, it's, is it a decent one? And that is going to take a massive leap in AI. But, there's a lot of artificial intelligence at play at the moment, I'm sure, in the algorithms already. How much does it play a factor in, say, the readability of a page? Because that's got a massive impact on accessibility, use of good plain English so that people can understand, with a reading age of, less than 12, for example, which is the national average here in the UK. So, things like that. Are we within, reaching distance of that sort of thing being factored in?
I don't know. So I think, I don't know if we have talked about kind of the reading level determination or something along those lines when it comes to search yet. So it's something where, from the communications that we do with site owners, it's usually more positioned as something where you should be speaking the language of your audience, where you know your audience best, you know how they speak, essentially, how they read, how they type, what they're looking for, and you should be speaking their language. And that's, I think, on a very high level, what we try to do. If someone is searching for a headache, they're not looking for a scientific paper about all of the possible causes of headaches. They just want some tips, maybe, or some information. And that's something where I think there's a large kind of mapping of what people are searching to what you have on your page, which plays a role there, where even if you don't understand the reading level of a page or take that into account, if someone is searching for very, common words, then if you have those common words on your pages, then of course that will match kind of from a natural point of view already, even without taking any of the advanced things into account. And whether or not reading level, for example, is used, I don't know. I could imagine that it's something that might be taken into account purely because it's something that has been around for such a long time, and these metrics exist. So maybe someone at Google, or almost certainly someone at Google, has taken a look at these metrics and tried to figure out, is this something that actually helps us or not? Because ultimately, we have to give results that are relevant and useful for users. And like you mentioned in your example with accessibility, if you're searching for something specific and we show you something that is accessible but doesn't match what you're looking for, that's not useful at all. So it's kind of something where if we can determine that this metric helps to provide better search results, then I'm pretty sure that this is actually being used at Google. I don't know if it's actually useful in providing better search results. But kind of that aspect of if it's something that can be measured, and especially if there are well-known mechanisms to measure these things, then almost certainly someone at Google has tried to see if there's a way to help improve the search results that way.
I don't think anyone wants us to be an arbiter of what's appropriate language or not. That's not what we're here to do. We're here to provide the best information as quickly as possible. I think what you're asking for would make a fantastic plugin for someone to download. So if they have a need for assistance, then they can contextually turn it on and have a page processed for them. That makes more sense to me, and a great use of AI instead of having us decide the appropriate for someone.
I think having a plugin that could tell me what the reading level is could be helpful when I'm drafting, so that I can see if it's aligning with whatever my intention was. Because it might be that I'm writing something that's academic, I guess, in nature, and then therefore I wouldn't be like put off by the fact that it says 12th grade reading level. But if I'm wanting to write something that's beginner level, then I could edit, get more approachable using easier to understand words and shorter words. But I think, as you pointed out, it depends a lot on the type of document that you're writing and the audience.
I totally get that. And there are certainly authoring tools that will help people get the right level of readability that, for their particular audience, and choose the right tone and style that they desire. But I think with the engine itself, if there was, a plugin or some settings, user preferences to say, prefer these kind of pages. Now that might be impossible because indexing the internet is a big ask anyway. So have to do that multiple times for different sets of user preferences, or maybe it is something that can happen live. I doubt it. So there's some technical challenges there, but wow, wouldn't it be amazing if Google as a search engine had a lot of user preferences in there, would give them prioritized search results to cater for their particular needs or their particular requirements. So wow, that would be amazing.
I think that's something where we do have a lot of settings, not necessarily for reading level, but it is something where I feel there are already a lot of settings, and adding even more settings makes it even harder to find the right setting for what you're looking for. And the angle that I'm always a little bit worried about is that you end up isolating yourself in your small island where you're like, this is exactly the content that I want, and you never see anything outside of that island. And that would be kind of a shame. Like there should always, I feel, be some mechanism for the search engine to say, well, actually, here's some content that really matches what you're looking for, but it's not matching your options that you have specified.
Brilliant. Well, let's kind of start to draw things to a close. Let's talk about if you guys have got any top tips about how people who, after having heard about this and all the other TSP sessions, are really fired up about accessibility, and whether they can, whether they're in SEO or any other area of digital within their organization, what would you recommend that they can do to get the wheels turning within their organization and get accessibility up the agenda?
I've got one. There's a great website called web.dev/accessible. I'm sorry if I stole your thunder, John. This is a great, relatively new resource that has some fantastic tips and content that's really good for general accessibility on web.
And I think from an SEO point of view, anything that you do for accessibility, it will work for SEO as well. I think the one angle for SEO that you should also think about if you're kind of vaguely interested in this overlap is make sure that the words on your page actually match what the user is looking for. And it's something that is very easy to say, but it's also very common that you look at a very expensive website, and it looks really nice and flashy and everything, but you're like, well, what does this company actually do? And putting clean words on a page, it just makes such a big difference.
I'm big on words because I can't see pictures, so I'm with you there. Words rule. Lizzie?
Yeah, I mean, web.dev, excellent resource for finding out like a good primer to what is important for making your website accessible. And then from an SEO perspective, +1 to what John was saying, you can also use the mobile-friendly test from Search Console to test to see how Googlebot sees your web page. So if you want to see if the text is showing up or if it's a blank page, that is a good way to test to see how the crawler views your web page.
Fantastic. And I will reiterate that if there wasn't a transcript of that podcast, then it wouldn't exist on the internet. It wouldn't be indexable. So, you know, the power of words. So brilliant. Thank you so much, guys. Really, really appreciate it. Hope everyone's had a brilliant TechShare Pro. And we'll see you next time.
That was great, wasn't it? Just hearing, as I said, hearing from the horse's mouth, and hearing also about how they're still learning as well and connecting up and trying to connect the tools and the advantage of SEO, connecting SEO and accessibility. A really powerful session, that, and you probably want to listen back to it later and see more of that learnings. I've put some links into the chat here to the original podcast that's mentioned, and also some links into the most recent webinar that we've done on the topic.